about him. We go back maybe on reading, maybe go back 4 or 5 years, but we met pre-pandemic very recently. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce him as a guest speaker today. Jhon Berketa is a senior lecturer, postgraduate supervisor, researcher, and has a PhD in forensic dentistry at a prestigious University of Adelaide. As a well-conducted academician, he does forensic caseworks. He's a scene team leader of dental victim identification in South Australia with specialized skills in maximizing the information gathered for identification of severely incinerated victims. He has published various articles in national journals, international journals, book chapters with over 200 citations. Recently, I saw him in IFS Panelist as well. He is a member of many forensic societies, regular presence to both national and international organizations, including Interpol, the Australian Society of Forensic Odontology, American Academy of Forensic Science, the International Organization of Forensic Odontostomatology, IFS. He's a member of Scientific Committee of IFS, a peer reviewer of dozens of journals. His work has been recognized at various platforms. He has received various awards. Not to mention, he's just a Google click away if you search him. As a personal experience, he's a live wire in forensic odontology circuit and a very warm person to be with, who will always greet you with a smile. And I'm sure students and academicians tuned in today are going to learn a lot today. Dr. Jhon, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Aman, for those kind words. I will try to do my best to match your kind words. Just going to go to the share screen.
Okay.
Can you see the screen there at all? Share.
No. Yes, now. Yes.
Now? Good. Excellent. So, and can you hear me clearly?
Surely.
Oh, good. Excellent. So, I'll just move this on. Right. So, it's very important when incineration cases or any sort of cases in where we have deaths is that we need to give closure to families. This is so important. As you know, there's legal ramifications if we can't identify someone. But main thing is what we do is humanitarianly, we want to give closure to families and allow families to have their grief, their session, because you do not want to prolong it. Prolonged grief will lead to other problems, and it's been highlighted in various articles that it can lead to depression and cardiovascular disease. People have experienced trauma, and that includes psychological trauma, are more likely to commit suicide, and there's various other things that can occur that's detrimental to them. So it's what we do as a service to our community is by identifying the victims so that relatives have their closure and are able to go eventually on to their lives. Obviously, if we're identifying some, we don't want to go to the wrong bodies for the wrong families. It's devastating for the families, and also politically, it's not very good either. So it's important we get it right. And in Australia also, we're embarrassed. It happens all over the world where the wrong body sent to the wrong family. And it's extremely embarrassing for the family, the government, as I said, and very distressing. So what we can do is actually give some definite closure on these victims. In the media, you've probably read about burnt beyond recognition. Hopefully, as odontologists, we can help solve this problem. And I'm just going to talk about like what happened in this Nigerian fuel tanker down the bottom there. And there was a petrol tanker that turned over, and all the fuel just went into a ditch. And the local villagers collecting all the petrol because it's all free. And unfortunately, there was an ignition, and over 50 people were totally incinerated. So unfortunately, they got a large excavators were just brought to the site, and they just dug them a mass grave. And they deemed that they were too badly damaged to be transported and recognised. They just didn't have the know-how of doing it. And unfortunately, this leads, as I said, to the relatives not really getting closure. There's just that lingering doubt that perhaps their son or their father wasn't there. He was in the next village and he's going to come back and he's just going to walk in one day. And even though it's highly unlikely, they still believe there's that little glimmer of hope. Unfortunately, that little glimmer of hope is when that presents a problem, because people don't get full closure and allowed to go on with their lives. They wake up every day hoping that maybe this is the day when all their dreams will come true and that person isn't deceased. These fires are going to become more common with global warming. We're looking at the Californian fires, are similar to what's always happened in Australia with the huge fires. And also even in India, you're getting a lot more fires. I think there were 46 just up north. There was towards Bangladesh, there were a lot of fires there as well. So these fires just don't exist in Australia, but it's going to become more prevalent, and odontologists might become more needed. I'm just going to give you an idea what it's like to travel through a bushfire. This video, hopefully you can see it clearly there. The intensity of the heat's amazing. Driving through this fire, it will actually melt the hydraulics of the car, and with no steering or no brakes, it's impossible. You can see it's very difficult to see, and there's a fire brigade up ahead, and you can just see it, and you can also see the embers. The heat is just absolutely amazing. So this is in my state in South Australia on Kangaroo Island, and you can see a car's just got overwhelmed. It stopped, and the victims inside were incinerated, and it gives you the devastation there, what actually happens. The height of the fires is incredible. You can see here a white fire truck, and I'll just run the video. And you can see the flames are actually as higher than the fire truck. So this, from a helicopter, it doesn't look like much, but these flames are quite long, quite high. And the fire front can extend for a long time. And so with these wildfires, people try to outdrive them. But if there's a wind shift, you can see the flames now, but if there's a wind shift, the smoke goes the other way. And we're looking at 100 kilometers an hour movement of that smoke. And people trying to outrun it and drive through it get covered in the smoke, and they start running into objects and start running into each other. And there they stay, and unfortunately they get incinerated. As they're running into each other, the victims are incinerated in these cars here, and it becomes a really difficult task to identify them. What is the problem is that with burnt evidence, there's obviously no ridge patterns. Ridge patterns, what we're talking about is fingerprints. So if there's no fingerprints or footprints or ear marks, they're all totally gone in these severe incinerations. Medical devices can be severely charred, and we're carefully removing those serial numbers to see if we can help. Dental is usually fragile, and this is what I'm going to talk about today. And DNA has problems of degradation. Where the fire brigade have been able to get two victims fairly quickly, there is a chance for DNA. But once you get over 250 degrees of all the tissue, there's no DNA able to be extracted. You can see this is the Grenfell Tower in London a year or two ago, and you can see the fire brigade can get up to a certain level, but above that, the victims were totally incinerated. And it didn't take long for the media to realise that all the DNA is totally going to be destroyed. So Dental did over 3/4 of the victims' identifications. In the Victorian bushfires, which I worked on, you can see here, the Dental is in the blue long column in the front, and DNA is next to it. So most of the victims were identified by dental evidence. But there was a problem. It took 3 months to identify them. So I'm going to go through why it took so long. There is a victim. Hopefully you can see 2 eyes there, nose, and there is the mouth, and you could actually see the lower jaw there with the teeth in place. And this is at the scene. Now, when that head is lifted and moved and transported in the van back to the mortuary, you get vibration. So you're getting this movement vibrations, and by the time you get into the mortuary, it's falling apart. And then we have to sift through it like a Humpty Dumpty, going through all the little different pieces to find some dental material. And this is what was left from that original scene, from that victim there. This is another one. You might be able to just see a red arrow there. There's a maxilla, and you can see the palate and the upper teeth in place. Again, by the time it got to the mortuary, it's all in bits and pieces. We can identify people just with roots if it gets to over 700 degrees and we've lost the crowns. By how? What we do is we're looking at the root morphology. We compare the roots to each other. So we compare the length to each other. We compare the angle to each other, the amount of bone between the teeth, and the apices, where the apices placed as well. So there's lots of different things we can look at, even just we've got loss of the crowns, and it gives enough information to form an opinion. Obviously, we had more than just this slide. The other thing, sometimes if you've lost an amalgam restoration, you can see a white lining just beneath there. So this is diacal, which is an old insulation layer. The amalgam's been burnt off. This is the same tooth, because if you don't take care, they're extremely fragile, this dental material, and you can see you actually could lose that information. But fortunately, we had one PA of it where we could see the diacal, the insulation layer in place. And this is the antemortem, part of the antemortem OPG. And then we could see that lining there, and we can look at all those angulations. So we can identify things as long as the evidence stays together. Again, this is another car crash, and you can just see here that the tooth 4, the upper first premolar, has been missing. So it's very important that we take photographs at the scene. If we're not going to be there, then at least I've instructed the police to take a portrait photo. At least we can know what's there and what's missing, and maybe do a probable or possible identification. Again, at the scene, this is that same case where we sort out what's what at the mortuary, and unfortunately we're left in just bits and pieces. And once we get into this stage, we have to start working what have we got here? How good is your anatomy? So we start actually putting things together and seeing how it all fits. But what we're doing now is we're back at the scene. We had certainty. We knew how things fitted together. We now don't know. We're just giving our opinion of how we think things should fit, looking at our anatomy. And even if we got fully erupted, fully intact teeth, sometimes we get the anatomy incorrect. So imagine with the charred remains trying to put this all together. It's quite difficult. So what we did was actually look back at the stabilizing materials from Mincer. Back in 1990, he tried different materials, and he said that really everything does work a little bit, but we need to probably use it. And I was looking at why weren't they being used? Try these materials again to see what was the problem. I put in various parameters to see, is it readily available, easy to apply, non-toxic, transparent? It has to be radiolucent so we can take x-rays, because with bird charred remains, you get a lot of the information from the x-rays. And also you wanted a reasonably rapid in setting time. So we placed restorations into pigs' heads. We do, at first, we incinerate them in the animal crematorium, and we could see how we went in stabilizing. Eventually this got fairly expensive, so we started doing sheep mandibles in a furnace here, the mandibles down here. We placed it into a muffle furnace, and we incinerate it at high temperatures. And these are just amalgams we just put in teeth, and this is from the incineration. And what we did, we used clear gloss enamel spray to spray the heads to see if that was enough to hold it together. We then placed it on a tile, and then we vibrated it. Just see if it's not going to work. So once it vibrated, we sprayed one side with the clear gloss enamel, the other side we left as a control on the other half, and to see which was lost and which was gained. And the ones that were treated, we had a total of 28 attached from the total. And non-treated, out of the total of 28, we had 17 detached. So we could realize, well, clear gloss enamel does work. We had to do another group because the Dulux was the brand name. They changed the formula, so we had to test it again. And treated, we only lost 2 detached teeth when they were treated. Similarly, we looked at fractures of the jaws, and by treating it, you could really minimize the amount of fracture and loss of post-mortem tissue. There was a problem though. Clear gloss spray has toluene, xylenes, ethylbenzenes, and C3 aromatics. So why is this so important? Petrol has toluenes, xylenes, C3 aromatics. So if this is a murder scene and someone's been deliberately being incinerated, we've now contaminated the scene. So the police weren't very keen for us to spray heads at the scene. So we had to think about something different. So we had to look at different materials to see what else we could do to stabilize the materials. So I looked at water-based paints, similar. Xylenes and C3 aromatics were present. Hairspray has ethanol, butanol, so it's not good. Cyanoacrylate has ethanol and it's a methyl methacrylate, but it also has toluene. So when you use cyanoacrylate, which is super glue, we only use it really just for the minor cases, just to quickly seal up those anterior teeth. PVA, which is the woodwork glue, that has ethanol in it as well. So then I said, well, what if they did the testing at the scene before we sprayed? But they said, well, at the mortuary, sometimes the pathologists like to also do further testing at the mortuary, so they still weren't very keen. So what we had to do is to look around different materials. Rather than keep burning heads, sheep's heads and pig's heads, I tried it in chucks to see what works the best. And it's not working as well, but basically flour and water works best. I've tried arrowroot, cornstarch, dextrose, all these different materials, natural products, and what I found out was flour and water worked extremely well. In Australia, we've got this material called clag, which is basically just wheat paste and water. So flour and water, wheat paste and water on a 50-50 mix. And again, we got some great results, similar to what we got with the paint. So treated, we only had 2 detached out of 44. Non-treated, we had lost 24. And this has been written up and on the article down below. But the flour water spray, and again, treating just with flour and water without actually the clag spray, just with mixing it flour and water, not even cooking it, again, we had a great result. To mix wheat paste, it's actually on YouTube. Just look up how to make wheat paste. And people use wheat paste to put up posters and use it's at children's classes and stuff. They tend to use that flour and water mixture and you need to dilute it enough so that you could spray it onto the heads just by using a common day spray that you use for ironing. Radiographically, flour does not interfere with radiographs, so you can still see those resins. This is resins we placed into sheep's teeth and then incinerated, then sprayed them with the flour and water mixture, and they were perfectly clear. And you can see how fragile, with all those cracks, how fragile those teeth are. Following the animal experiments, we then used human heads. People donate their body to science and for anatomy classes, etc., at the university here. And what we did once they finished their dissection classes is to take it to the mortuary to the crematorium to incinerate them. And so what I did was actually to test the incinerations. This is a mandible that hasn't been sprayed, and this one has been sprayed, and it's gone. So these are mandibles from the heads I've taken, and I've put on a vibrating plate and turn the volume down a bit, and you can see how quickly the teeth are lost in the vibrating plate. Yet this side that's been sprayed with the flour and water mixture totally stayed intact. And even if I turned it upside down, it's still not a problem. The way the material works is that being so fragile, you think, well, how does just by spraying the outside works? What it does is actually joins over the top and also gets down into the fine cracks. So by getting down to the cracks as well as over the top, you stop the fracturing from propagating further. So by just holding it at the top, it doesn't allow the cracks as you lift it to move for the cracks to keep going. So just by spraying it over the top, you can hold the material together. To make sure it sets quicker, we used to use a old floodlight, which generates a bit of gentle heat. If you ever stand in front of these old lights, they do generate a little bit of heat, which is gentle enough to allow the material to set. And you can see there's a sprayed head. I apologize for the images here, but you can see it's for educational purposes. Flour and water spray, sprayed on the head. then use a light to set that material, and it'll allow it to then do a full examination. The big problem though was it was fine until it got cold and wet. You couldn't allow the material to set. Also, the floodlights have now gone on to LED lights. So the police and the emergency people don't use floodlights with the old filaments. So there's no more heat generation. So this would take quite a long time to do. So when it got cold, then it was a problem. But I was reading Topolesky a couple of years ago, did an article on where that anthropologist used gelatin. And so I did some further studies using gelatin powder. And you can mix gelatin with water, and we tested it again. Now, when you're using gelatin, so this is the and you just simply mix it together. When you mix it, I'll just do it here. When you mix it, you use a stirring motion. So you just mix it gently, going round and round as a mixture. It doesn't take very long to dissolve. You can see it's starting to dissolve pretty well here. But you just mix it for about a good minute and it will work fine. What is very important is if it's tempting to mix it quickly is to shake it up, to mix it up. But if you shake this up to mix it, I don't know if you can see here, but it just goes all cloudy. So you've got this cloudy material on top that actually in a cool temperature starts to set, so you can't pour it into a spray gun to spray. So this portable hand spray, you can't use it if it starts setting inside it. So just use a gentle mix when you're mixing this material. So it's this gelatin powder, just a teaspoon in some bit of water, mix it up inside, spray it on the head, and it works really well. Again, we tested on the sheets, jaws. This is a lower mantle turning upside down. You can see the heat and you can start to see the loss of enamel from the teeth. I stopped there because eventually you would probably start to all deteriorate too further. We couldn't have anything else to hold together. This is a video, and this side's been sprayed, and I actually added a bit of gelatin crystals on the outside. So this is not needed. I thought this might be a good idea to speed the process, but it doesn't allow the visual inspection as much. So I've now stopped putting the actual crystals on top. So I'll just show you the video. This half is sprayed. So with the vibrations like that, you can see how long the roots are, and yet they come out easily, whereas the other half totally stayed the same. So I'll just go through that again. And you can see how effective that is to holding everything all together, simply by mixing a bit of gelatin and water together. And the results treated, 40 non-detached, and yet non-treated, we're only able to keep 5 from 80. So 6 grams, which is about a teaspoon, to about 100 mils of water, and it works really well. This art, it's been getting published at the moment. It hasn't actually been published, but it's been accepted for publication already, and hopefully will come out pretty soon. Taking x-rays of it once it's been sprayed, similarly to flour, there wasn't a problem. You can see how fragile the teeth are, yet it held all pretty well together, and it doesn't interfere with x-rays at all. Now, I'm just going to go off on a tangent here, because some victims, you won't feel are totally incinerated, but you might be short on anti-mortem material. So if you're short on anti-mortem material, you might be able to use a photograph or something like that. Now, this is not sufficient for Interpol to say, yes, it's definitely that person, but maybe you can exclude someone saying there's no way that could have that angulations of those teeth and the positions of the teeth. You can see here that the lower teeth are a bit of imbricated. So this tooth is on the lingual, and then that's the 4-2 is lingually placed also, but then the 4-1 is more labally placed. And you can see those of you who are clever can see that's probably a crown, and this is probably a crown as well. So you can get an idea if it's possibly that person, possible or probable, which will help a lot, especially in a large disaster. So this is what he looks like. So this is what I was saying about a charred part, where this person has been burnt, but the fire brigade have been able to put him out. in these sort of cases, we tend to use the super glue to hold it, just that bit of methyl methacrylate super glue, cyanoacrylate, sorry, just gently over the top, not spraying it, just to run the glue over the top from in there. You can see how the other teeth were quite clear, but and you probably would have be able to identify people if you had the ante-mortem information there. But if you only have the photographs and you've lost those anterior teeth, then you've got into serious problems. So what to use in different situations? I haven't tried not to confuse you too much. So I've got a little table here. Short burning time, cyanoacrylate or super glue just on the upper teeth is probably all you need to do. Where there's no testing for accelerants in a disaster, you can quickly get a spray can of clear spray, and you can quickly put that all together, and you don't have to mix anything. It's quite easy to do. Where it's very high temperature and low humidity, we can use the Wheatpaste, which is the flour and water mixture. But in all other situations, usually gelatin, which I've just shown you just the last case, gelatin works really effectively. So in each situation, you can use a different material, and you've got to make your common sense. There's a bit of an overlap between Wheatpaste and gelatin. Gelatin will work up to 32 degrees, not a problem as well. So in Adelaide, we have these testing facilities. So we can actually light fires inside these testing facilities and these compartments. And we place heads at different heights, and we place wood inside, and then it's all lit up. So we light a fire, and we totally incinerate inside here. We have monitors along the walls. We can actually test the temperatures of the walls, the temperature inside at different heights, and at which height the head is. Heads that are up high reach a higher temperature rather than heads that are down low, and so therefore you don't get less incineration, obviously. And that's just a clue. Sometimes you may not be able to get a direct area of spray, and this is what I found with the flour and water initially. In this case, this is the head of a victim under a car accident, and the fire brigade could remove the door to get to the victim, but if they did so, there'd be a lot of movement. So a quick shutter like that might lose all the material. So what I did was I laid down on the tarpaulin then and sprayed backwards and sprayed the head. And then they could remove the doors easily, knowing that it's actually stabilized. And you can see this is just showing the flour and water mixture and how fragile all the material was. This is another case just to show the fragility and why it's so important holding things together. You can see the lower premolar there. It's literally come apart and come adrift a bit. But by spraying it, we have to hold that in place. What, not so importantly there, but actually it held half a molten restoration in that spot. And similarly, this has started to melt as well. Why was this as important is if you look now at the ante-mortem and you look down here on the bottom left, there are those restorations. And if that wasn't all held in place, we probably wouldn't have an idea where they actually came from and an opinion of, are we sure that came from those teeth? In another case, just to show, sometimes with the trauma and the fires, like a car accident or aircraft accident, you get a loss of tissue as well. This is the ante-mortem of this victim. And we thought, you know, well, great, we've got this endodontic root canal tooth there and pretty bad dentistry, so we shouldn't be a problem. Also to note was this curved root, and then there's that straight root, and you look at the links and compare it together. Because when it came to the post-mortem, there's that curved root and straight, but we actually had lost that upper six from the trauma, but we're able to stabilize it. So we actually do a comparison of the roots compared to each other. And we had some other little bit of information, and we can then conclude that that is that person. Now, forensic teams, when we go to the scene, we want to explain the event. Is what the police want to do is explain the event and identify the victims. And this number two is what odontologists and anthropologists can assist in. So at the crime scene, the police would like to secure, separate the witnesses, scan the scene, see over the whole lot of the scene, usually with a drone or something like that. But we're mainly involved in 6 and 7, which is search for the evidence, search for dental evidence, and anthropologists obviously for other tissues, and secure the collection of the evidence. It's not necessary for odontologists obviously to go to every case, but where you have a totally intact body, odontologists really aren't necessary. Fragmented remains, the police are pretty good at picking up what's bits and pieces. They know what it looks like. However, once you start getting burnt and fragmented remains, they're still not too bad because they get some sort of an idea, but incinerated remains is probably where odontologists and anthropologists need to be, because we can identify what burnt tissues look like, and burnt teeth and burnt jaws. And when they get incinerated and fragmented remains, sort of like a high-speed accident, vehicle accident, whether it's a train, plane, or a car, then it's a good idea to have anthropologists, and especially if the remains are commingled, so there's more than one person at the scene. There's evidence that if you leave it for too long, the material can deteriorate with time, but usually it's pretty stable, so there's really no rush to run to the scene. Because if you run to the scene and quickly grab everything you could see and not properly document it and photograph everything, you could destroy the evidence that's there, and you can get confused of what did you pick up and from where, and you can contaminate the scene by stamping all over the scene and actually destroying evidence. So we need to have a standard operating procedure so you know what you're doing. Also, you need to work with the police. So you work together as a team. The police probably, they will not invite you probably if you haven't talked to anyone first. So as odontologists, I really stress that you should visit your local coroner and say, hey, they make them aware that odontologists can assist in fires, but we need to be training with the police, and so that we work together as a team, because the police are unlikely to want to change their operating procedures to incorporate dentists, because they're not aware how important it is to identify these victims, and it hasn't been done in the past, and assume that they can't be identified. So you need to go to the coroner and state, this is important, this is what odontologists can do. And in the fires from overseas, like the Victorian bushfires and the Grenfell town in London and other events, odontologists have been extremely successful, especially as if odontologists can go at the scene and stabilize the remains and collect it, make sure it's stable. So, but you've also got to do your part and actually take time to train with them. Also, you have to prepare yourself. So what we have is a prepared scene bag, and that way it reduces preparation time because you've got everything all together, you're not going to forget anything, and you don't have to start looking for everything bits and pieces. So the things we might at the scene are those sprays, and I'm just going to go through some of the small things that you need to make, some of the important things you might need there. When you first get a phone call to say that there's been an incident, we run a scene running sheet. So whilst we're on the phone, we jot down who rang us and what time, and where is the location, who's in charge, have we got the right equipment, have we got a nomad, have we got other equipment there that we might need, how are we going to get there, are the police going to drive us there, and what hazards there are that they know of. And later on, we're going to, once we get back, we want to know the contact of the images, has a debrief been conducted about it, and have you restocked all the equipment from when you've just come back. So when someone rings, we write down the date, the time, the place. This becomes then a legal document to say, well, I was asked to go to the scene by so-and-so, and you've documented the time and place, and you've signed, you've initialed it. And as you go for each section, you actually run this running sheet down to say actually what happened. Because you think you might remember, but at the heat of the moment, your mind's running along and your adrenaline's running along, and you think you might remember, but after the event, when there might be an inquest, well, usually there is an inquest, it's difficult to remember all the little fine points of when you were there, what did you do. So by writing everything down, documenting everything correctly, you've covered yourself, and it looks great that you know what you're doing. In equipment, make sure you wear enclosed boots, because you'll be walking usually in scenes where there's broken glass, broken metal, and you need thick boots to protect your feet. I use a light that's inside a beanie, because quite often if it's inside a house, usually electricity doesn't exist anymore in there, it's quite dark, you can still have this beanie underneath a helmet. And also that frees your two hands. You could take a torch, but that only leaves one hand to do stuff. And you need your two hands because quite often it's unstable. Goggles are absolutely essential because any bit of wind might blow up some dust and some embers, and you don't want any embers in your eyes. So you need to make sure you're wearing goggles. You need, as well as the examination latex or vinyl gloves, you need the thick leather gloves because you'll be removing the material over the top to get to the dental evidence. Need a knee pad. So this is just a thick pad to place down on the knees, because surprise, surprise, all the material's down on the ground, and it's usually quite low. So you'll be usually on your knees looking for material dental evidence on the ground. Also, it's take your own provisions for food and drink. Usually you're going to be there for a few hours. So I like to take my own water, coffee, food in a separate little container, because in a disaster, no one prepares for it. No one knows exactly the disaster is going to happen there. There's usually no electricity. There's everyone's running around, and being fed and having something to eat and drink is the last priority. So I take my own now from experience. So if you've got your kit, you've rolled up to the scene, the first thing you do is actually consult with the scene commander to get permission, and you write that down on your sheet, on your scene running sheet, when you turned up and who you spoke to. They'll be looking at a safe way to go in. They've probably done a drone over the whole lot to have a look at the area of the disaster and discuss the safety issues present. I've got a little video to show that these scenes, once you have a fire go through, everything just tends to collapse. So you don't know where everything is. You've got to be careful where you're walking. What are you moving? How dangerous is this all in there? It could be even snakes, could be still anything in there. Also, you can see the smoke. You can see what's hot. You've got to be very careful making sure we're wearing those gloves, those thick boots. You don't have to wear all that when you first turn up. This is myself at the scene. You check in with the scene officer there. This is my another assistant odontologist carrying the bag, and we're just getting ready. You don't have to get dressed up yet. It's just manual running down, get a debrief of the situation. You then can get changed in what you might need to wear. Helmets usually inside in buildings, because you never know what might fall down. Other safety issues, you could have unstable terrain, you have residual heat, loose wires, sharp objects, chemical fumes, and those embers I was talking about. You can see here in the Grenfell Towers, they're all walking in, protecting from any falling debris. Electricity wires, careful, don't want to be electrocuted, make sure you're safe. In Australia, we have these trees that come in from a central spot, and the fire tends to still sit inside these trees, and it can easily fall down. So just be careful where, and there are 2 victims inside this car. This is a victim laying down across the metal parts. Because he's been supported by a metal frame, the flames can get underneath and is totally incinerated. So dangers here, we've got electricity probably, we've got maybe asbestos, we've got maybe the roof might tumble in. So there's various little things you've got to think about, and you've got to discuss this with the police. The toxic substances, these are the gases that are forming, can either be very carcinogenic or actually be toxic to you. One of the worst gases is this bottom one, carbon monoxide. When in any fire, there will be carbon monoxide being produced. What we do is we have the fire brigade or the police to actually use these monitors, which actually have alarms when it reaches to a certain height of the carbon monoxide in parts per million. Why is this so important? Is you can't smell carbon monoxide. You can smell that something's burning in there, but you don't know the level. And at 3,200 parts per million, if you read that, you will get headache and dizziness and nausea in 5 to 10 minutes, but you'll also be dead in 30 minutes. So once you get some headache and dizziness, you need to get out there, because hemoglobin attaches to carbon monoxide 200 times better than oxygen does. So just by going out means you won't be saved. Because you need to be probably in a hyperbaric chamber. You need 100% oxygen supplied to you. So you've got to really make sure you're wearing these monitors, or get the fire brigade to go in first to monitor the level. And an outdoor car, it probably doesn't matter. You've got plenty of ventilation. You can see the odontologists in there going in there spraying the head. You can see the intensity of the fire by looking at the molten metal there. You look at this scene here, you can see now, where are the teeth? Well, what's a good hint is actually this area, that's the skull cap. And the top of the skulls are in scenes where incinerations are quite easily recognized by the suture pattern. You can see the bone sutures across the skull, and usually you'll find the teeth are below there. So usually the teeth are on the ground, and you can just see that there, and there is the maxilla in place here with some loose teeth. People in cars will tend not to be sitting up. They tend to try to crouch down low and their head's in that spot. You need to spray in from the side here. And this case where the head is totally lost, but we had this lower edentulous mandible. And what we did find was actually porcelain teeth. So by making sure you collect all the bits and pieces there, we're able to go to the lab and just find out what color they used in their teeth, and gives you some idea. Obviously, it doesn't give it much, but any little bit of evidence might help the coroner decide, as well as the circumstantial evidence, who it is, because they don't like circumstantial evidence. When you go to a scene and you need to remove the body, as I said, quite often the fire brigade can remove these doors. So that way you get easy access to the victim. But I like to go in and spray the head first before we do anything, and then to put a bubble wrap and then put a paper bag over the top before you lift the victim out of the car. And that way, if anything falls out, the paper bag, the bubble wrap and the paper bag will collect all the evidence so you don't lose it. So this is actually the person taken out, just showing the bubble wrap, and wrap that up in the head. You then need to go back and collect the further evidence. Again, this is head over the top. If you haven't got a paper bag, any sort of soft material, just to take that all together, keep all the dental information all in the one spot, so you're not searching through the whole body bag looking for material. Once the body's removed, need to go, this is an upturned car, need to go back in and look for further evidence. So what we do is we sweep underneath to see what other evidence we could find of the human tissue. This is Zaf Curry gave me this piece of evidence here from New Zealand. So this looks like a maxilla. There's tiny little bit of evidence here, and that's what they found. Now, taking an X-ray of this, what can we tell? Roughly, you can do an age estimation. Now, in that victim, you could see that the upper centrals haven't erupted fully, haven't been still forming. These are the premolars, and there's the canine from the side. So you get a rough age estimation of that victim. Even if we can't identify that victim, we can then say this is probably a person of how much age. Now, the way we age estimation, you've probably heard lectures on this. We can use charts. This is Sakir's chart here. And if you look at the chart, there's the centrals, there's the premolars still forming. So you're looking at about a 6.5-year-old, give or take one a year. So it's not very exact, but it gives you some idea. It's not an 8.5-year-old or a 4.5-year-old. It's around about a 6.5-year-old. Sometimes you might get lucky with dentures with a name imprinted on the palate. The back of the palate's ideal because they don't usually, with insulation with the rest of the body, they don't tend to get burnt as much. Cobalt chromes, the frameworks usually don't get altered at all, but you tend to lose the acrylic. But just by having these two cobalt chromes, we can say what teeth are present and what are missing. So you then look up the missing persons. So you can say that probably the lower mandible, the 4 to 4 are present. And in the maxilla, you can see that the 2-2 tooth is missing and it's been replaced by a single pontic there. And yet on this side, the 1-2 and the 1-1 were missing, probably around the canine, and the posteriors were missing there. So probably not enough, obviously probably not enough to totally establish someone, but you could exclude that it's not that person, it's that person, but it's most likely to be this person because this is the dental pattern of extracted and missing teeth. Other material you might find are dental implants, and just goes to show I was asked to collect all the implants from a crematorium, and these are just screws. They're not actually dental implants, these three, but this is actual dental implants. So it just goes to show that we need dentists at the scene to actually pick up these materials, and so therefore they just don't think it's screws and it's not important. In retrieval, you can see this incinerated victim on a car seat. The Maryland Bridge was actually found beneath, down low. So as I said, it's important to collect all the information underneath. This Maryland Bridge also, sorry, not, this is just a normal bridge that was collected, but you can see it was total loss of material, but it's separated from the head. And this is here is the ante-mortem X-ray compared to the post-mortem. See, it had an amalgam in there, but it gives probably sufficient evidence looking at the shape, the size, the length, and the morphology of that whole bridge gives you a fair bit of information in just one piece of retrieved evidence. Even if you've got part of a mandible and they've lost the teeth, what you can do from here is actually give someone as well as age estimation. Well, this is totally erupted. You can say, well, maybe the third molars are present. You can see what teeth were present in the sockets and what weren't. So also you can look at the length of the roots that were in place. So you do some root morphology, just even when the roots aren't there, by looking at the sockets that are there, that remain. If you haven't got a plastic bubble wrap and a paper bag, you can put it in the remains in a bucket with some sand. The only problem is that with movement, they tend to sift in the sand, and you need to sieve the sand when you get back to the mortuary. All that sand has to be sieved to make sure you don't lose any evidence, and you have to be very careful in sieving not to damage the material. Just going back, how important these little bits of information you pick up afterwards. This is from the Victorian bushfires, and it's very hard to see anything there. And just by having the crowns of the teeth which have popped up, why are they so important? Well, if you take a X-ray of that, so we take a photo, we take an X-ray, you can see that that person had an upper central with a resin in there, also had an upper molar with an occlusal amalgam filling on there. So you can then go back through the missing persons and to see who had a resin there, who had as well as a upper molar amalgam. Roots, all little bits and pieces of roots in place. So why is this important, just to collect all those bits? Well, you never know, you might get lucky and find a root canal there. Also, you've got the morphology of the roots that are in place. In the loose remains, this is by the Bushes and Ray Miller, you can pick up the bits and pieces, could have actually resins that have popped out of the crowns. And through the X-ray fluorescence, you can then determine what material they're made of and does it match the ante-mortem material. This is the portable XRF there, and it's been published so back in Journal of Forensic Science. The remains also, once you pick them up, you can respray them and you can pick up all the bits and pieces just so they don't fall apart on the way to the mortuary. You can see how fragile these pieces are. It wouldn't take much for it to lose it. And something like that where it's encased in bones, not too much of a problem, but still spray it again. You can see here, this anterior part was lost, and by placing into a little container, similar to one of these containers, and put a bit of bubble wrap or even light towel in there, just to protect it, give a bit of cushioning effect, helps. You can take an X-ray at the scene of all the little bits and pieces as well, if you've got a portable Nomad and something like an X-ray portable sensor unit. Just make sure when you do take an X-ray that you make sure you align the tooth as they would be in the mouth. So there's no use taking this lower premolar and having it laying down sideways when really you want to match what was possibly in the ante-mortem information. So you need bits of foam on either side just to get that in the correct orientation to make sure you'll be able to match it to ante-mortem radiographs. So this is just taking some X-rays. You can see the sockets, these are just moving out a little bit. You can see this cantilever bridge. It doesn't take much for it to lose that. So if you take it at the scene, you've got this information and you've got the relationship of this bridge to this premolars. So it just gives you that little bit of certainty if it doesn't fall out. Around the head, you'll find that people will protect their head, and you'll find sometimes watches, earrings, and other circumstantial evidence that will just help with the police. As I said, implants, usually with porcelain, you don't get the porcelain tends not to melt, so you get the crowns on top of the implants are still present. Also, you might be able to find fixture devices, which the police aren't usually recognising, but you could actually help them in finding these little bits of materials and collect them. Once the body's been collected and you collect all the material, make sure you transport it flat. So place a board beneath the body for support. You can imagine what's going to happen here. All the material is down, just fallen down all into one big hump. And you can imagine the damage that was done. So you place a board for when you're carrying the body, and making sure that you also tell the driver of the funeral van or whoever's taking the body to the mortuary to be careful. Because also I like to ring the mortuary up to say there's an incineration case coming, and to be careful, because Once it's bagged in a body bag, you don't know that they don't know the condition of that body unless I'm being told. So the other thing is to do is actually to write on it. So as well as ringing them, write on the bag. So write, this is the head, this end, this is the odontologist, this is the number, the serial, the human remains number in there. And this is for forensic odontology to check. So that the mortuary technicians know that this is an incineration case and that odontology should be involved. And you can see here in America that during this, the bushfires there, you can see them writing down all this information. So in summary, work with the police for safe access. Go to the coroner first because you're more likely to be invited to assist. Once you provide the, I don't mind if you use this video to show the coroners, to show what we can do and what odontology can do in identifying people. Because remember, there's no DNA, there's no fingerprinting, we're it. And if they don't utilize us to stabilize the remains, they're probably unlikely to get closure for these families. And the families want to know why. Sometimes we can't get to the scene, so I've also instructed the police. So our CSI guys now carry a kit. This is the gelatin. This red and white thing is actually the clag, which is the Wheatpaste solution in there. And there's some water, and this is the spray gun to spray the heads with. And that's in every single CSI kit in South Australia now. So that way, if they come across an incineration case, they can spray the heads. This gives an idea of the fires there, but thankfully, you can start seeing the greenery starting to come back. Thank you very much. This is my website. If you've got other questions you can't think of today, also I'm obviously on LinkedIn and Facebook and all the rest of the other sort of media bits and pieces there. But thank you very much for listening, and I hope I might have changed your lives in some small way. Thank you.
Okay. The same problem. Now my video is not starting. Unable to start the video. I think you should make me the host then.
Let's see. Is that working?
No, it's not.
Oh, I'm sorry. Host. See.
Sir, it's working now? I guess
Not
it's
working
work.
now?
Yes, it started. It started.
Good. Excellent.
Okay. It was great amalgamation, great compilation. Before we start over with the question answers thing, I have two questions which were popped up to me, and I'll shoot it to you. And then before that, cyanoacrylate cement, as I know what I've been, because I was trained in Central Forensic Laboratory, Chandigarh, where Pathankot 2016 attack happened, and when there was not availability of much of equipment and material at the site where the attack took place. So they gave me a list, I searched the literature, and gladly I could find your two articles which were there. I should quote you. That's why I said that I saw you 4 years before I met you. I had seen your paper. The paper was in legal medicine, and I think you had used sheep mandibles to really replicate the incineration. One was that, and the second one was some kind of a glossy spray you used in another article where, and both of them were amazing. I saw one more Indian article by Risu. It happened in Maulana Azad, and then they compiled, and that was cyanoacrylate, clear acrylic spray paint, hairspray, spray varnishes, clear fingernail polishes, varnishes, quick setting epoxy resins, and those were the kind of things suggested when there's nothing to really go about. These you might find in household thing. Anything you want to add more which can be used?
The big problem there in a lot of those materials is that you can imagine doing nail polish. You start touching it is the problem, and you don't use a hairbrush or you don't use a nail, because as soon as you start touching it, it will move. It will and I said the other thing with the gloss spray was eventually, as the police found out, is I'm contaminating the scene. So with a volatile liquid, and if they're doing testing for accelerants, that was the problem. So do not touch as much as you can. The only thing you do is the super glue for the uppers where it's only slightly charred. But a lot of the other materials have problems in that you're trying to touch it. And you can imagine super gluing a whole head. Also, once you've super glued and you've joined the arches, you can't separate them.
Yes.
So it's a problem.
I think with a medical officer there or a crime scene investigator, he might not allow you to touch even. He might tell you can watch the body from outside or you can click a picture, but usually till it reaches the mortuary for a forensic or ontologist to take a expert, it becomes a little difficult to really even touch because the crime scene.
See, this is why you need to educate them first.
Yes,
so we need to educate to show you need to stabilize it, because if we don't do this, you are going to get a body back to the mortuary, but you're not going to identify that person.
Two quick questions to you. One, I'll be failing in my duty as a panelist if I don't ask you any modifications in the new normal pandemic of incineration things, if it happens, God forbid. Any modifications you suggest which might be safety for the body as well as to the person who is investigating as well?
Yeah, that's why we use the gelatin in the water. The gelatin is just the way to use it is to spray it. And so this is the latest innovation is using, I've tried agar, but that actually started setting in the spray bottle. And
COVID-19 setup, COVID-19, where we have to be safe from the body fluids by ourselves as well.
Yes.
These sprays are, not, droplet kind of expansion takes place.
No, actually, with cyanoacrylate super glue is that if you spray that and you get in the eyes, it's impossible to remove from your eyes because you can't see it. So cyanoacrylate is very dangerous to use as a spray. When the fingerprinting people use cyanoacrylate fume covered, it's extremely dangerous material. So you do not want to go spraying. You're right, but is that you've got to be careful using that. But with gelatin, it's safe. It's a reason. When it's made from different animal products, whether it's fish, cows, or pigs, it can be all different animal products can be used in gelatin. And I don't know what in each country they have a certain gelatin material made, so it's available everywhere. It's cheap, and it, as I said, it didn't take much to mix up, and you can then spray in a little spray bottle.
All advantages.
Preparation is important, and you need to get yourself to talk to the coroner and then the police, so they know then that you're available, because you don't know what's going to happen. But I'm sure there'll be more fires with this.
Okay.
Unfortunately, buildings, tall buildings.
It's my personal problem, which I face very often. I see the police not sensitized much about photographing a body which is there before stabilization. After you just suggested, a lot of photography happening or a scanning happening. What exactly is your take? Because they are having a point and shoot camera maybe, or anything to keep next to it, so that when we develop it, there is no distortion, or there is no the development takes place in a life-size manner. Anything you suggest?
Oh well, we actually, when we go to the scene, I actually get the police involved in taking a photograph. Get them to actually take the photograph, and you can use a ABFO #2 ruler inside, looking at the size and shape, obviously as well. And
not available. If ABFO not available, ABFO scale not available, then what do you suggest?
Then you can use anything that of a set scale
or a circle.
Any scale will be fine in knowing them there, because we're not looking at a bite mark pattern or anything like that. We're just looking at size and shape. And the other thing I found out is, as odontologists come to scenes, is that we've got the placebo effect of the police all of a sudden will look after the tissues more and the head more better than if we weren't there. They all of a sudden don't want to be told off or want to be, looking at us scathingly. So they will tend to look after the dentition more, and also by getting them involved by saying, look, well, can you take a photo of this? Can you take a photo of that? And then you get that, the running sheet, who you spoke to and who took the photograph. So you get them. So obviously you got access to those photographs. But get them involved, and
so it's a lot of psychology happening here.
Yes, exactly. You got to.
All right.
I'm an odontologist.
Yes. Okay. There is a question. Are you at Adelaide offering any kind of DVI trainings, or maybe a short term, a 10-day week, anything where people can come for observership, paid, paid, unpaid?
It's difficult because with COVID, you can't get in Australia at the moment. This will have to be on hold. We would be probably happy eventually to do it, but currently we can't even travel between states. So at the moment, our teaching's been minimal. When we teach, not even our postgrad students can enter the mortuary. We had to use dry skulls and get them to practice taking intraoral X-rays that way. It's unfortunate, but
maybe post pandemic, post pandemic maybe.
Yeah, it's a postgraduate course. Yeah,
I'm saying maybe post pandemic you can think of it.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
Watch this space. I can't really commit myself either one way or the other, but that'll be good.
Yes. Any more questions popping up? Please go ahead. How do you preserve? This Gabriel M. Fonseca is asking, how do you preserve remains after examination if you need to examine them again? Because there'll be kind of, I think, there are religious beliefs of disposing the body of somehow, maybe burning, or there are various other means. So what is the best way to preserve them as records? What records you suggest? List of records you suggest?
Obviously, we do a visual inspection. At first, we then document everything we can see from a distance without touching anything, and then we intraoral radiographs. Now, if you can't do intraoral, we use now CT scanning. We're fortunate, our mortuary, this year the government, because they knew that with the COVID, they got a CT scan in the mortuary, so we CT scanning the mortuary, so that has a permanent record of them. If you haven't got a CT scan and you're worried about damaging the evidence, placing in, because you can go usually underneath the jaw to get the intraoral X-rays, you can actually put a digital X-ray sheet from the outside and shoot with a beam going underneath, similar to that side. So I always take external X-rays and photographs as much as possible first before trying to separate the jaws, because once you've separated, you've damaged it and you've got evidence. But it's a matter of being thorough, take your time, be thorough, and that way you've got all the records intact. It's a good question because you don't want to, you want to make sure you're not in a hurry. You've got to be more important because you only get one shot at it. And you looked at that tooth where I took a X-ray of it and then I wanted to get the whole tooth and I actually touched it and it fell apart. So yes, it's a matter of being thorough. Take the X-rays from the sheets from the outside as much as possible and make sure you kept your evidence. And also we retain the evidence. We also have a backup of all the information off-site. So we have a backup so we don't lose the digital information as well.
So are you
inquiring months afterwards? It's not usually the inquiry. There's inquiry about a deficit. It's usually not next week. It's usually a long time afterwards. So you want to have all your records there, your running sheet there, and
okay. That's great. I think we are through with the questions and such. If they are there, they can email you or they can contact
Rami. Yeah.
That'll be great, and we have had a great session. I pass over to Dr. Abhirami. Where is she?
Yes, sir, I'm here only, sir.
Yes.
That was a very nice lecture, and after so many months, I learned like nice things from Jhon Berketa, sir, and that was a nice question. The preservation of remains in examinations and all, that is from Dr. Gabriella, I guess so. And then, sir, I'm thanking you, Dr. Jhon Berketa, sir. You took so much of risk, and then you just gave a nice lecture, sir. And behalf of my dental college, Saveetha Dental College side, and my academic directors, I like to thank my academic director, Dr. Deepak Nalaswamy, sir. And then I like to thank my dean, Dr. Shija. And then my whole department, whole pathology department, I like to thank, and my HOD, very supportive HOD I got, Dr. Harold Shirley, and then my department staffs, everyone I like to thank, and Dr. Aman Chowdhry, sir, you are here today because of you only it went well, and I think the team also it was working very nicely, I guess so, sir.
we're very blessed.
Yes.
That's,
Okay, Dr. Berketa, you can see the certificate for your
Yep, lovely.
we sent to you,
Yes.
and courtesy Saveetha Dental College, Dr. Vishnu Priya, Dr. Srija Vargesh, and Deepa Nalaswamy, Dr. Deepa Nalaswamy, and Dr. Abhinami. It was great having you.
Thank you. And it was great to pass on this knowledge, and it's great to see you as well. Thank you.
Take care. Take care.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much, sir.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Abraham, for organising
Thank
it.
you so much, sir.
Bye.